My true story, from Pennsylvania. My son said, "You'll be fine in the garage for a while." I slept there for 2 nights. On the third, I handed him the eviction notice. My daughter-in-law barked across the kitchen table, her voice slicing through the quiet of the morning. "Listen, old hag, in the house, you're suffocating us. The garage is the only way this family can breathe. Think of it as a test of endurance. If you survive the winter out there, we might reconsider." My daughter-in-law slammed her coffee cup down so hard it rattled the saucer. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, feeling every inch of my 75 years, waiting in the silence I dared not break. I had been a court secretary for 47 years, organized, respected, known for my careful satchels of case files and my deep, unwavering voice in the chambers. After a mild stroke 3 months ago, I could not walk the lines any longer. But I thought I was headed home, to the warmth of familiar routines, not to a cold garage, not to dust-covered boxes and forgotten gardening tools. I live here now, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, with my son and his wife, their home, their world. After the stroke, the doctor said I should not be alone. My son Michael insisted I move in, temporarily, so they could help me. I agreed, because I thought they meant help. Help with my groceries, help with my appointments, help keeping watch over my medications. I did not imagine I would soon become a burden to sweep out of sight. The morning after my first night in the garage, I woke to a floor covered in sawdust. My bed, a simple folding cot with a threadbare blanket. There was no heat running, no window letting in light. A single flashlight hung from the wall. I lay staring at the ceiling beams, counting their cracks and the way the paint bubbled. I found myself missing courtrooms. I missed the echoplex of voices and the steady tap of typing. I missed the crisp smell of paperwork. Later that morning, my son poked his head out. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, half concerned, half unwilling. He wore sweats rumpled, just like his wife. I nodded. My voice felt like ash in my throat. He sighed. "We'll get you a space heater soon. Just need to check the breaker, okay?" "Okay," I managed. When he shut the door, I heard his wife's whisper, "If she freezes to death, we don't have to deal with power of attorney or property transfers." And then her voice rose, "It is better than dealing with this every single day." I stayed still, pretending to sleep. My hands felt weak, but my mind was as sharp as ever. I remembered filing warrants, turning pages of testimonies, managing courtroom schedules for 80-year-old judges with tremors. I had never felt so useless. I got up and found my robe hung over the garage door. I wrapped it around myself and sat on the cot, hands in my lap, breathing in the smell of cardboard boxes and rusty tools. I wondered what they used me for before. Had I become a reminder of aging and dependence? The second night was colder. I pulled the thin blanket over me and prayed I would not wake shivering into the middle of the night. I thought of my husband, of his laugh, the way he held me when I cried about the stroke. I thought of our small apartment, now sold, of the courtroom corridors I would never walk again, of every dusty document I signed in steadier days. Morning came again with a low, chirping sound that startled me awake. My phone. I had hidden it in the glove compartment of their car before moving in. I answered. It was my niece, calling from Baltimore. "Aunt Eleanor, how are you feeling?" she asked, kindness on the line. "I'm managing," I said softly. Her voice quivered. "You sound cold, physically cold. Are you safe?" I swallowed. "I'm safe," she said. "Mom told me you were staying in the den." I paused. I sleep in the garage." There was a long silence, then, "Mom, that is illegal. You should not." She hung up. I closed my eyes. Legal. I had been so concerned with being polite, with not making trouble, with showing gratitude, but gratitude sits in a comfortable chair by a warm fire. This was gratitude in shivers. That afternoon I kept busy. I found the small toy trunk we had brought with my granddaughter's childhood blankets. I lined my cot with one of them. I folded the blanket neatly and placed it next to me. I turned the flashlight so it faced the cot rather than the shelves, giving a small sense of sanctuary. But the truth was, I was not welcome, not safe, not at home. That evening, I heard them through the wall vent. Michael's cringe of frustration burned through me. "I can't believe she's still alive," he said. "Are you hearing that?" His wife replied, softly but audibly. Better alive than with power of attorney to sign, taxes to file, emotional breakdowns of our own. You aren't ready, he said. We have to wait till the lawyer says she's incompetent. I pressed my ear to the vent. Competent. That word, they were preparing paperwork while I lay freezing because they had the money and they wanted control. I curled onto my side, eyes closed, tears pooling in the shadows. This wasn't grace. It was judgment. This wasn't family. It was a cold calculation. I prayed that night to not freeze. I prayed my mind would remain intact. I prayed that somewhere someone would see what was happening. I remembered my days at the courthouse, the clack of gavel, the rustle of legal briefs, the authority in my hands. I still had words. I still had clarity. I still had enough to act. Those 2 nights in the garage were a trial of endurance. They wanted silence. They thought I would disappear behind dust and shadows. But I learned something vital. Survival doesn't mean you have to stay silent, and endurance doesn't have to be compliance. And that realization was the spark that carried me into the next morning, when, on the 3rd dawn, I would walk into their dining room, clear-eyed and composed, and hand them the eviction notice, signed by my lawyer and endorsed by a retired judge who knew me well, a judge who remembered what justice felt like, even when it was served from a cold garage. The first night in the garage was colder than I expected. I had layered on every sweater I could find, pulled the rough blanket tight across my shoulders, and tried to ignore the draft seeping under the door that connected the garage to the main house. Every sound outside, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, seemed magnified through the walls. My bones ached from the cot's metal bar pressing against my spine. I curled into myself like a wounded animal, waiting for the night to pass. But it wasn't just the cold that kept me awake. It was the memories. I thought about Michael as a boy, his wide eyes when I packed his lunch, the way he used to hug me after every spelling bee, even the ones he didn't win. I remembered working double shifts, typing court records until my fingers were numb so he could have new shoes and piano lessons. I remembered scraping together money for his college tuition when his father's pension ran out, sacrificing my own vacations so he could study finance in a university 3 states away. And now, here I was, shivering in his garage like a forgotten piece of furniture. The next morning I sat on the edge of the cot, my knees stiff, my breath visible in the air. I poured a little water from the thermos they'd left me, lukewarm, barely enough to soothe the tightness in my chest. There was a bowl of rice porridge on a tray beside it. Cold, no spoon. I used a plastic fork from my purse. I waited until I heard them leave before I slipped out the side door and walked slowly to the mailbox, just to move my legs. My joints screamed, but I kept my back straight. That afternoon, through the small cracked window near the top of the garage door, I watched them return, with friends. They carried grocery bags full of wine, chips, party platters. Laughter echoed through the driveway. It was a birthday. I had forgotten. Michael's wife turned 42 that day. From the garage, I watched them gather in the living room. Through the curtain gap, I saw them pop champagne. Someone brought out a cake. A banner was taped across the wall. "Happy birthday, Rachel," it read in gold. No one came to the garage to check on me. No one brought me a slice. That night, I coughed until my throat stung. I tried not to make noise. I wiped the blood with my sleeve, then tucked the cloth under the mattress so no one would see. I did not knock. They had made it clear. I was not to interrupt their family life. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the back porch. The walls in the garage were thin near the water heater. I pressed my ear to the spot and held my breath. It was Michael, talking to someone on the phone. His voice was low but sharp. "She's still here, yeah. I thought she'd last 2 days, tops." Pause. "No, we can't move forward until we have proof she's not competent. The lawyer said once we get 2 more medical reviews, we can apply for full guardianship." Another pause. "She won't sign anything. She just sits in there like a ghost." And then a chuckle. "I swear, Mom's tougher than she looks, but if she slips, even once, forgetfulness, confusion, we can file." I stepped back from the wall. My stomach turned. Guardianship. That's what this was about. They weren't just cruel, they were calculated. They wanted control of my medical choices, my finances, my remaining assets, and they were waiting for me to crack, to cry, to forget. to falter. They had mistaken my silence for surrender. It was a mistake. I sat back on the cot, hands trembling, not from fear, but from fury. I wrapped the blanket tighter and closed my eyes. But I wasn't resting, I was remembering. By the time morning broke, I had a plan. Not revenge, not anger, just truth. Truth, delivered with the same precision I once used to prepare court documents, with the same voice I once used to announce, "All rise" in a courtroom. They thought 2 nights in the cold would make me weak, but they had no idea who raised that roof they were drinking under. And I was about to remind them, quietly, completely, and without raising my voice. My granddaughter, Lily, gave me the watch 2 Christmases ago. "You have to stay sharp, Grandma," she said, placing the sleek little thing on my wrist with pride. "It tracks your steps, monitors your heart rate, and if anything ever happens, it records." At the time, I smiled and humored her. She was always so thoughtful, so practical, so much like her mother, my daughter, gone too young. I wore the watch every day, mostly to appease her. I never imagined it would become my shield. But that night, after listening to Michael's whispered plans for my guardianship, I tapped the watch face 3 times. The screen blinked once, red. That meant it was listening. And I began recording. The next morning, I did not speak a word during breakfast. Not that anyone offered me anything, but I passed Michael in the hallway while he refilled his coffee, and I smiled at him like nothing had happened. I went back to the garage, closed the door. Later, that afternoon, they had guests again. This time, Michael's college friend Sam was visiting, a loud, boisterous man with opinions as big as his belt buckle. I heard their conversation from the kitchen, just a few feet beyond the garage wall. "She still out there?" Sam asked, laughing. Michael's voice was low. "Yeah, in the garage." "No way, that's cold-blooded, man." "She'll be fine," Michael said, then added with a chuckle. "That house has been ours since we got married, just missing the paperwork." Rachel chimed in. "Garage is the only place she can die and not inconvenience anyone." They all laughed. I pressed the watch again. Another blink. Another file saved. I recorded it all, their laughter, their words, the sheer cruelty disguised as casual conversation. That night, I reviewed the files. The audio was clean, crisp, every word pronounced. The kind of evidence I used to help file formal reports, the kind of testimony judges leaned forward to hear. I opened the garage's hidden Wi-Fi network. Michael thought he'd shut down access, but he didn't know the second line I had installed during the renovation I paid for 5 years ago. I used my old tablet, still tucked inside my suitcase, to transfer the audio and video clips. And then I sent them. To my lawyer. To someone I had not spoken to in nearly a decade. Her name was Frances. We had worked side by side for over 20 years. She was once the lead clerk in the family court division, known for her encyclopedic memory and zero tolerance for abuse. When I retired, she brought me a yellow rose and said, "If you ever need me, truly need me, you call." That night, I called. Frances answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you'd finally stop being polite," she said. "I have something," I replied. "I figured you would." I emailed her the files. 5 minutes later, she texted, "Got them, you're not alone. Sit tight, this is going to move fast." And just like that, the temperature in the garage felt a little less bitter, because Justice had heard me, and it was getting dressed. I waited until the house was asleep. It was past midnight when I slipped my coat over my shoulders and sat near the garage's side door, the one that gave me just enough signal to make a call. I held the phone close to my chest as it rang. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. When he answered, his voice was exactly as I remembered it, measured, steady, low. "Eleanor?" he said. "Yes, Judge Benton," I replied. "I hope I didn't wake you." "I've been waiting for this call for years." He meant it. I could hear it in the sigh that followed. "Tell me what happened." I told him everything. Quietly, slowly, without dramatics. Just the facts, like I had done 1,000 times in his courtroom. The garage, the freezing nights, the conversations I had recorded, the plan for guardianship, their voices calling me a burden, their laughter over my death. "I have the files," I said. "Audio, video, dates, faces, you will hear everything." There was a pause, then he said, "I told you once, if you were ever betrayed, you call me first." "I remember," I whispered. And I told you why, he continued, because no one remembers the sharpest woman in the room until it's her word against theirs, and when it is, they lose. My throat tightened. Can you help me? I'm a retired judge, he said, but I still have friends. Good ones, and I know which doors to knock on. That night we built a plan, layer by layer, like the legal strategies we use to prepare for cases with no mercy and high stakes. He connected me with a clerk who worked for the Court of Common Pleas. By 3:00 IE, I had submitted the petition through a secure channel. Francis, my lawyer, had already drafted it. We filed for a temporary restraining order against Michael and Rachel, citing elder abuse, financial coercion, and unlawful living conditions. We included a motion for asset freeze, citing the danger of immediate misappropriation. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't lie down. I sat on the edge of my cot, my robe pulled tight, my eyes fixed on the shadows dancing across the garage wall. At 7:13 a.m., my phone buzzed. Order granted. Emergency injunction approved. Enforcement within 12 hours. 12 hours. That was all I needed. By 9:00 a.m., Francis had already contacted a court-appointed officer and local law enforcement. My name was cleared from dependent status in any medical evaluation Michael had submitted. A forensic auditor was assigned to review the financial activity on my accounts. At noon, while Rachel scrolled on her phone and Michael brewed coffee, I walked out of the garage and into the kitchen, holding a sealed envelope. Michael turned. "Mom, you okay?" I set the envelope on the table, slid it across the surface with 2 fingers, and said, "Effective immediately, you are both prohibited from contacting, communicating with, or financially managing any aspect of my estate." He laughed, thinking it was a joke. Then Francis walked in behind me, followed by an officer with a clipboard and a badge. "Michael Harper," the officer said, "you've been served." Rachel dropped her mug. It shattered. "What is this?" she cried. "Restraining order," Francis answered, "and notice of financial investigation." Michael paled. "You can't be serious." I met his eyes. "You put me in a garage to die. You laughed about it. You planned to take everything while pretending it was care." He started to speak, but the officer raised a hand. "You are advised not to speak further. This is now a legal matter." And just like that, the house I helped pay for was no longer theirs to manipulate. The woman they tried to bury had returned, carrying proof, protected by the very system I once served. And this time, the gavel was in my hand. On the morning of the 3rd day, I did not shake. I had not slept much the night before, not from fear, but from a readiness so sharp it kept me alert, like I was back at the court steps at 6:45 a.m., reviewing case files in the biting winter wind with a black coffee in hand. The kind of readiness that comes not from rage, but from clarity. Cold, legal, procedural clarity. I put on my best coat, dark navy, wool-lined, the one Charles had given me the Christmas before he passed. I brushed my hair, pinched some color into my cheeks, and tucked the thick yellow envelope under my arm like it was a loaf of bread. I did not knock when I entered the kitchen. Michael was at the counter, swirling milk into his cereal, shirtless, humming like nothing in the world had ever gone wrong. Rachel stood near the sink in her robe, scrolling on her phone with a smirk on her lips. I walked to the center of the room and placed the envelope on the table. Deliberate. Quiet. I took a step back and folded my hands. Michael turned, annoyed. "What's that?" he asked. I didn't speak. He rolled his eyes and grabbed it, tore it open with one hand like it was junk mail. Then he froze. His eyes scanned the header, the court stamp, the black type, notice of legal complaint filed, elder abuse, financial coercion and neglect. Plaintiff, Eleanor May Harper, defendant. Michael Stephen Harper. Rachel looked up, her fingers paused mid-screen. "What is this?" she asked sharply. Michael gave a bitter laugh. "You filed a lawsuit? Against your own son?" "I filed a truth," I said calmly. "You made the garage my home. You made your ambition more important than my well-being, and now I've made the law my witness." He slammed the paper down. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said, "and so is the judge who signed the order." "This is garbage," he snapped. "It won't hold." Rachel grabbed the packet. Her eyes widened. "Michael, there's an emergency order in here, a 30-day restraining order. Effective immediately," I said. He turned to me, voice rising. "You are my mother, and you are my plaintiff," I replied. He crumpled the document in his hand, fists trembling. "You think this scares me? You think I'll let you do this? I'll call the lawyer." At that moment, the doorbell rang. None of us moved. Then the knock came, hard, 3 times. I stayed where I was as Michael stomped to the door and yanked it open. 2 officers stood on the porch, one holding a clipboard. "Michael Harper?" the taller one asked. Michael's voice cracked. "Yeah? You've been served a protective order filed through the Court of Common Pleas, approved by Judge Benton and filed under Emergency Statute 57E. We are here to enforce the 30-day no-contact order and to begin inventory for a temporary financial freeze pending investigation." Rachel gasped. I stood still, hands folded. Michael's defiance began to tremble in his shoulders. "This is insane. She's old. She's confused. She doesn't even know what she's doing." I stepped forward. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I gave you 30 years of sacrifice. I gave you a future, and you gave me a garage and a plan to steal what little I had left." He looked at me like I was a stranger. Rachel backed into the hallway, pale. The officer handed Michael a packet. "You have 1 hour to pack. You will stay at a separate residence. Any contact, physical or digital, will violate the court order and may result in arrest." "I'm her son," he muttered. "You were," I said, "but today you're just another man who underestimated a woman who remembers everything." He didn't speak again. They left in under an hour. The garage sat empty by nightfall, and I, wrapped in the same coat Charles gave me, finally sat at the kitchen table, in the chair they once said I wasn't welcome in, and opened the window to let the cold air in, not because I had to, but because I chose to. By the end of that week, my story had left the garage and entered the public square. It started with a local journalist, a soft-spoken woman named Terry whom I'd known in passing from the courthouse years ago. She called Francis after hearing whispers about a protective order being issued in under 12 hours and a son being removed from his own home by his mother, a retired court clerk. Terry asked if I would talk. I said yes. We met at Francis's office, where I told my story with the same clarity I had used reading court briefs for decades. No tears, no dramatics, just the facts. The recordings, the dates, the blanket, the blood I coughed into my sleeve, the birthday party behind a wall, the laughter that followed their plan. The article hit the local paper 2 days later with a headline that made my heart stop. "Mother sleeps in garbage, takes son to court, and wins." The subhead read, "Retired clerk files elder abuse charges after being forced into freezing conditions. Evidence includes hidden recordings and court testimony from a retired judge." My photo, taken outside the courthouse, showed me in my navy coat, eyes sharp, face calm. The image spread quickly. By Friday, regional outlets picked it up. A Sunday morning talk show asked to interview me live. I declined the national press, but only because I had more pressing invitations. The Central Pennsylvania Women's Alliance reached out first. "We'd be honored to have you as a guest of distinction at our spring forum," the organizer said. "You've given so many women strength." Then the Harrisburg Senior Council, then a legal roundtable, then the State Bar Association. Apparently, I'd become something of a folk hero, the grandmother who took back her chair at the kitchen table. But what moved me most wasn't the titles or panels. It was the handwritten letters. They came by the dozens. One from a woman in Pittsburgh who had spent 6 months sleeping in her basement while her son's wife told people she was traveling. One from a woman in Ohio who thanked me for reminding her that being quiet doesn't mean being helpless. I sat at my desk each evening, replying to as many as I could. It became a ritual. Tea, music, and writing back to the women who, like me, had waited too long to speak. Meanwhile, back in Harrisburg, things unraveled for Michael and Rachel faster than even Francis predicted. The church they attended held a private meeting after reading the local news and receiving a wave of concerned calls. Michael, once the chairman of their community board, was quietly removed from his leadership position. He violated the moral trust we expect of our stewards, their pastor later told me. But the real blow came the following week. An investigator assigned by the state's Department of Aging launched a full review of my case, including the recordings I submitted. As part of the inquiry, Rachel's parental capacity was evaluated, especially after the quote she gave during that recorded conversation, The garage is the only place she can die and not inconvenience anyone. That line appeared in nearly every news story. She argued it was taken out of context, but context didn't save her. The court issued a temporary suspension of her custodial rights to her daughter, my granddaughter. The child was placed with Rachel's sister, pending further evaluation. Rachel's screams echoed down the courthouse hallway that morning. I didn't go to watch. I didn't need to. Frances called me after and simply said, "It's done. She's out." There was no satisfaction in seeing a mother lose her child, but there was justice in seeing a woman held accountable for thinking another woman's life was disposable. Later that month, I was asked to speak at a seminar titled Power in Quiet Resistance. I stood at the podium facing an audience of women, some young, some gray-haired, all leaning forward like every word mattered. I began, "I am not loud. I was never the loud one. I took notes. I scheduled hearings. I organized the truth into neat folders and handed it to men who got the credit. But I never forgot how to speak. I just waited for when it mattered. They put me in a garage and called it generosity, but I recorded their cruelty and I gave it to justice. Not for revenge, but because someday another woman might be in a garage with no coat, and I want her to know she is not alone." The crowd rose to their feet. I did not smile wide. I just bowed my head, grateful, grounded, and when I returned home that night, to the little apartment Angela helped me rent, I looked around at the simple walls, the working heater, the soft chair near the window. No velvet, no granite counters, no glitter. Just peace and power, the kind that does not scream, the kind that never forgets. I now live in a second-floor apartment in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of Mechanicsburg, just 20 minutes from the courthouse I once served, and a world away from the garage I was left to freeze in. It is not grand, just 2 rooms, a small kitchen, a cozy chair by the window, but it is mine, and I did not find it alone. Angela, my granddaughter's daughter, my sharpest thread to hope, found this place for me. She was the one who drove me here the day after the protective order was in force. She brought my suitcase, unpacked my clothes, arranged my few keepsakes on the bookshelf. She brewed my tea before I asked. She was the one who called me Grandma again, without hesitation, as if my title had never been tarnished. "You're safe now," she told me, and for the first time in months, I believed her. Angela comes by 3 nights a week after her nursing shifts. We make soup, we play dominoes, and sometimes we sit in silence. I love that silence. It does not bruise, it heals. After the media storm quieted, I was asked to speak again, this time not at a women's forum or a legal roundtable, but on national television. A Sunday morning news segment called Voices of the Forgotten wanted to feature my case as part of a series on elder abuse and family betrayal. At first I said no. I had said enough. I had won. What more was there to prove? But then Angela looked at me and said, "Grandma, someone out there is still sleeping in a garage, someone who doesn't have a lawyer, or a judge, or a recording. But maybe they'll hear you." So I said yes. The set was sterile and bright, the lights hot. The anchor, polished and charming, held my hand during the sound check. I wore my best navy blue blouse, my hair pinned back. The microphone clipped to my collar felt like a weight, but I sat tall. When they rolled cameras, I began like this. "I am not here to cry. I already did that. I am here to remember, because memory, when protected, becomes evidence." I told them the whole story, the stroke, the garage, the whisper behind the wall. I spoke slowly, not because I was old, but because I wanted every word to land like a footstep across ice. Then I paused, and I said, "I do not hate my son. I mourn him. I mourn who he used to be. But I do not want him punished. I want people like him prevented." The segment aired 2 days later. The station received over 4,000 emails. Some offered support. Some offered donations to elder abuse shelters. Some simply said, "I believe you, and now I believe myself." After that, I began volunteering with the Pennsylvania Elder Support Network, consulting on cases where others, mostly women, were unsure if what they were experiencing was enough to speak up about. And I told them this: if you have to ask whether something is abuse, it probably is. I do not consider myself a warrior. I do not like war. But I do believe in defense, in holding a line, in saying, "Not this time." because sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is not scream, but endure. Remember. And finally, tell. The house is still there, sitting quiet on a tree-lined street in Harrisburg, the one with the blue shutters and the lopsided mailbox I always meant to fix. But now it is no longer their fortress, no longer the backdrop of my humiliation. It is mine again. After the investigation concluded and the courts ruled in my favor, I regained full legal ownership of the property. Michael and Rachel contested, briefly, but the judge reviewed the original transfer documents, the ones they had tried to manipulate, and ruled them null due to coercion and fraud. My name was reinstated, their names erased. I did not move back in. Instead, I put the house up for rent, not to strangers, but to a young couple with a disabled parent of their own. I met them personally. I saw the way they pushed their mother's wheelchair up the ramp. I heard how gently they spoke to her, how they asked about her comfort before their own. I knew they were the right tenants. Every dollar of rent goes into a fund I created, Justice in Silence. It is not a large organization, yet, but its mission is simple: to provide emergency legal and emotional support for elderly individuals experiencing quiet abuse from their own families. Not the kind that leaves bruises, the kind that leaves someone sleeping in a garage with no one to notice. I work with lawyers, social workers, and volunteers. We take calls, we offer consultations. We listen to stories that sound like mine, and we tell those women, those men, you are not alone. And no, you are not crazy. To launch the foundation, we recorded a short video. They brought a camera crew to my apartment, set up a single light, a microphone, and asked me to speak freely. I looked straight into the lens and said, they thought I was just a little old woman who didn't understand what was happening. But I do. I understand contracts, I understand silence, I understand the law, because I wrote it, filed it, enforced it for 47 years. They thought they could leave me in a garage, but I turned that cold into evidence. I used to be a mother who cooked dinner and folded laundry. Now I am a woman who issues consequences. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it watches. And when the time is right, it stands up. The video now plays on our foundation's homepage. It has been viewed over 500,000 times. I still live simply. My days are quiet. But now, when I sit by the window with my tea and hear the laughter from the street below, I smile. Because this isn't the story of how I was mistreated, it is the story of how I remembered who I was, and became the judge of my own ending. After everything, after the restraining orders, the interviews, the foundation launches, I began writing letters. Not to lawyers, not to reporters, to them. To Michael, to Rachel, and most of all, to my granddaughter. I had no illusions. I did not write out of sentiment. I wrote because there were things that needed to be said, clearly, calmly, permanently. The letter to Michael was 3 pages long, typed, signed, delivered by certified mail. I began it simply. You stopped calling me Mom long before the garage. I reminded him of the summer I worked overtime to buy his first suit for debate team, of how I learned to drive again at age 60, just to take him to his college interviews when his father was in the hospital. I reminded him that I never once asked him for repayment, only for respect. Then I wrote, when you placed me in the garage, you did not just fail as a son. You failed as a man entrusted with memory. You forgot who held your fevered body through nights of croup and despair, and that forgetting, more than the cruelty, is what condemned you. I ended the letter, without hate, but without forgiveness. You may repair your life, but not through my silence. You lost the right to that. The letter to Rachel was shorter. You laughed about where I might die. I hope you remember that sound every time your daughter asks where her grandmother went. No more, no less. The hardest letter to write was to my granddaughter. She was only 12 when it happened, young enough to be shielded, old enough to notice things not spoken. She had slipped a folded card under the garage door the second night. I still have it. I'm sorry if I was mean. I love you. Maddie. I did not answer then. But now, from my little desk by the window, I wrote, Maddie, you did nothing wrong. The silence between us was not your fault. Sometimes adults hide their shame by calling it protection. But you are old enough to know that loving someone means asking questions, and I hope one day, when you are ready, you'll ask me everything. I will tell you the truth, and I will never make you feel small for seeking it. I signed it simply, with love, always and unshakably, Grandma. I mailed it. I do not know if it will be answered, but I needed her to know I had not disappeared. I had reclaimed my name, my space, my story, and most of all, my voice. That is what justice in silence is really about, not punishment, but presence. Not revenge, but the restoration of truth, page by page, word by word, until even the women in garages are remembered by name, and no one ever dares to forget us again. Thank you for walking this road with me. If you've made it to the end of this story, perhaps it is because something inside you recognized the cold. Not the cold of a garage in Pennsylvania, but the cold of being dismissed, underestimated, or quietly erased. Maybe you felt the sting of being called a burden, or heard someone whisper behind closed doors that you've had your time, as if dignity came with an expiration date. Maybe, like me, you were told to be grateful for scraps while they dined at the table you once paid for. Maybe you were told that your pain was exaggeration, that your memories were wrong, that your truth was inconvenient. If so, know this, you are not alone. Here at Grandma True Stories, we hold space for women who endured, who kept the receipts while everyone else forgot the debt. We speak for the mothers, the grandmothers, the widows and workers who gave everything and asked for almost nothing, only to be told one day that they were in the way. But we don't stay silent anymore. We don't scream to be heard. We speak with the weight of years, of memory, of justice long delayed. Because our stories aren't fiction. They're the missing pieces behind every family portrait that looked too perfect. They're the footnotes no one wanted to publish, and now, finally, they're being told. If this story moved you, if it made you clench your jaw, or blink back tears, or whisper "Me Too" into the quiet, then I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, because when you do, you're not just clicking a button, you're sending a message to the world and to every elder woman who was ever pushed aside, that we are still here, that we are still watching, that we are still telling the truth. And that truth? It may come late, it may come quiet, but it never comes empty. Click that subscribe button, because revenge has no expiration date, and wisdom never retires.